This meeting to order, the Finance, Audit, and Legislative Affairs Committee. First order is approval of the minutes, April 23rd, 2024. Can I get a motion, please? Betty and Linda. Are there any comments, questions, additions? No? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any nays? Okay, moving on. Thank you. We are at informational items, the monthly financial report.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Before you today, you have April 30th, 2024, which we are about 33% of the way through the fiscal year. For a high-level overview, we have all funds combined. We are at 18.8% of the fiscal year 24 budget. This is currently just reflecting typical trends, and we have, as you all know, a significant amount of property tax collections that would be coming later in the year. We have, on the expenditure side, we're only at 17.1% of the budget, so we are doing well there. Going to general fund, we have reached 26% of the annual budget, which is slightly below the 31.8% from the prior year. The largest variance has to do with the personal property replacement taxes, like we have reported on in the past, because the state of Illinois had an error in the formula and they are going back from prior payments that we had already received. Our next distribution will come in July. For the other revenues, income tax is slightly below budget expectations by about $90,000, but that is offset by the sales tax, which is combined about $81,000 up, so there's a very small delta there. Going to the expenditure side, we're about 25.7% of the general fund budget compared to last year of 23.9%. There are two departments that are highlighted in red. One is for the Audit department, which the board had approved to transfer to the long-term services care fund, and the election commission, which is up due to a spring election. Other just minor to point out is that once we receive the property taxes, both funds for the highway department and the long-term care services fund should both be positive, so that we can look forward to that. That's just a very high overview. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to go deeper. If there's ever anything that you have an interest in me presenting on at this time, please feel free to reach out to me or Heather so that we can make this time most valuable for this committee. I'm here for any questions.
Are there any questions? No questions.
Okay.
Okay. We are at Long-Term Care Services Fund report.
Good afternoon. In your packet, you have the through April 30th, 2024 report for the Long-Term Care Services Fund. I want to give an update. We did receive, over the past couple months, we have been negotiating with one of our Medicaid vendors, Molina, and we did receive our negotiated payout of $297,000 last Friday. I do not have an updated balance for you yet because there's journal entries that have to be posted, but it's good news that we were able to negotiate that and wrap that one up. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Are there any questions? We had a discussion a couple days ago on the phone, so towards the end of the year, we're going to be talking a little more strategy on the long-term care fund. Heather and I strategized on that, so but we're gonna wait on that till we kind of get more solid numbers. So, any additional questions? Okay, moving on to May 2024 accounts payable review.
There's a lengthy list in your packet. If you have questions on anything specific, please let me know.
Okay. Are there any specific questions? Okay, thank you. Next is Peoria County capital projects, funding sources, and progress.
So this report is updated with expenditures through June 14th of 2024. Again, on the far right is the progress to date, which will tell you if the bid has been awarded, kind of what status the project is in. And then the Health and Human Services building, I just want to point out, is at 50%, and that is based on the amount billed to date. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Are there any questions? Okay, moving on. Peoria, external auditor selection.
Yes. So last month, we had come to you and said we needed a little more time. We wanted to conduct interviews after our review of their proposals that were sent in for the external auditing firm. We were able to complete those, but we didn't complete the last one until last Friday afternoon. And so we do have a recommendation, but it wasn't in enough time to get it in the packet for today. It has to be a resolution that is passed. I believe that Chairman Williams would like to call a special meeting, it'll be short, most likely, before the July board meeting so that we can officially accept our recommendation.
I appreciate all your work on that. So, okay, we'll have that special meeting. So, are there any questions? Okay. Informational items that it's not on there. We have Taylor with us today who's going to give us an update on legislative.
Good afternoon. I'll keep my remarks brief unless there's questions, but wanted to just briefly go through an overview of the budget and what we're anticipating how that's going to impact counties throughout the state. The budget overall, was put together at the last minute, so to speak. I'm sure you've seen in the newspaper reported it's the largest ever budget in the state's history at about $53.7 billion. That's slightly less than the revenue the state's going to take in this year. So there is a delta between the money the state is collecting, but that's partly due to $1 billion revenue enhancement package that the state put together. CPRT was mentioned, personal property replacement tax. As I actually was walking into the building, received a heads up that there's a report coming out that we are going to see a reduction in personal property replacement tax of about $1 billion. So even last year, with the Department of Revenue trying to true up those numbers between LGDF and PPRT, there's a reduction in PPRT. With that $1 billion headed into this next fiscal year, we will think, there's going to be a large impact to the various local governments who do receive PPRT. So I would encourage you all to take a look at that and maybe try to, as you go into your budgeting process later this year, anticipate there being a reduction to what there's normally been. We did not receive an LGDF increase this year, like we had the previous two. Although they were small increases, we were happy that we were at least making inroads to getting back to that 10% for local government distributed fund. As things stand right now, we're sitting, just shy of that 7% number. So we're still going to continue working with other local government entities to try to get that number back up to 10% where it belongs. But that's going to take a number of years. Just a couple quick other budget highlights before I just talk about a couple bills I'm going to make sure everyone's aware of. There was about $400 million put into local road projects, so we're happy to see that. There was $900 million set aside for renovations of state prisons, so we'll see how that plays out and where those monies end up. I will also note that there is a $150 million diversion out of the road fund and out of the leaky storage tank fund, the LUSH fund. and that's supposed to be, I'll use quotation marks, supposed to be a one-time transfer. There was some leftover or a healthy balance. So in order to balance this budget, they did swipe about 150 million. So that's something we're going to also be keeping a close eye on. Obviously, it's been a long time since the state has made it a habit of sweeping those funds. But when push comes to shove, we do sometimes see a preponderance or a reliance on sweeping some of those funds, especially those dollars that go down to local governments. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. And then just real briefly, a couple of large items. There was a number of bills. Just like anything else, the General Assembly operates on trends, and so we do start to see kind of trendy topics and movements. There's a number of bills this year that essentially wiped out the ability for there to be co-pays, partial payments for insurance, various different insurance. So again, this isn't an indictment on these bills in the past, but it's important to know that moving forward, your plans will now have to operate under these new parameters. So you will not be able to charge copays for mental health, a number of cancer screenings. There were some pregnancy provisions as well. So they're all in the list that we provide to you, and I can go through them in greater detail if there's questions. But we are seeing a trend now of not allowing there to be kind of co-payments, not only for drugs, but also for individual procedures. So that's just something to be aware of, especially as you're looking and working through your insurance plans you provide to your employees. And then just, again, briefly, a couple of new things that we're seeing. We know that, this governor's administration and the General Assembly have really placed a lot of emphasis on moving Illinois to a green energy future. And so we saw a number of proposals introduced this year. We are going to see a number of provisions taken up during veto session, and I'll talk about veto session as I wrap up. But one of the things we did see move through session this year was a carbon capture and sequestration bill. And this is dealing with the number of pipelines that were proposed last year and the year before, some of which went through the county of Peoria. Now, currently there's no pipelines proposals before the ICC, but we do know they're coming. This new law regulation deals with the caption of carbon. It deals with its transporting through pipelines, and then its sequestration in deep wells dug into underground. It's primarily the sequestration part. It's only going to happen in central Illinois. That's where, geologically speaking, that's where the easiest place is for them to store the carbon. So it's going to be a hotbed. We're going to see a lot of activity moving forward. There are a couple things that I do want to just point out with regards to CCS. Any proposed pipeline now will need to have at least 2 public meetings in the county where the pipeline is proposed before a proposal is submitted to the ICC. And so that should help with a little bit of transparency for some of these developers, whether or not they contact you and as a county board ask you to do those, or whether or not, the law doesn't quite specify that level of detail. But we are anticipating that developers would come to the county and then work with you all for any pipeline proposals prior to it being submitted to the ICC process, which will be a bit of a change. There was some concern about liability with regards to sequestration. Let's say they pump in the CO2 underground. Let's say it moves. Let's say there's an issue. The new law solely places that liability on the developer and potential third parties like subcontractors and things. So it does protect local governments in the state from having to be on the hook for any subsequent liability after the carbon is stored. And again, we're talking this carbon is going to be underground for 30, these wells, 30, 40, maybe even 100 years. And so that's an important aspect, to have that liability stay with the company and not transfer over to the local government or the state. And then also, it sets the rate for um, the pipelines will be the most in the nation per mile. And because Illinois is so attractive, as I talked about, geologically speaking, there was a thought that that's okay. So some of that money is going to be utilized to do training and help IEMA develop plans working with local first responders along pipeline routes. There's another concern there. If a pipeline were to burst or have some type of integrity issues, would first responders be able to, would they know what they need to do? Some of these we've seen in other states where these pipelines are. There's been ruptures either because of landslides or forest fires, and they've needed to evacuate entire neighborhoods or schools wherever they're close by, because CO2 is a heavy gas. It does potentially present a lot of hazardous situations, and so the fact that there is going to be a plan in place and that IEMA will be offering grants and training to first responders, we think will be very important in the case that there is some type of disaster which would necessitate some type of response. One other thing I wanted to quickly talk about that will be, I think, important moving forward is there was a property tax task force put together, and this is unlike what we saw back in 2017 or 2018, where they put together a property tax task force, which consisted of just shy of half the General Assembly members. So if you can imagine how difficult it is for legislators to focus on the task at hand when they're in the Capitol building, getting them to focus on property taxes was very difficult. And so this study will have the Department of Revenue and DCEO go through and look at all of the various property tax situations that we have throughout the state. Obviously, Cook County is a little different than most other counties, but this is going to be a comprehensive study. And one of the things that I worry about, but one of the things we also need to pay close attention to, is what is in this study, because once the study is published, we're likely to see legislative action to enact some of the ideas or recommendations that come out of the study. And so that could be a sea change for how property tax operates. Obviously, we saw it this year where the state, took a look at the grocery tax. Even though the state receives no direct dollars from the grocery tax, we could see a similar situation where even though the state doesn't receive any dollars via property tax, it's something they pay very close attention to and are likely to make changes if they think it will suit them. I think the problem is, how does that in fact impact the local taxing districts who receive and utilize those property tax dollars? So right now, there isn't a schedule that's been released. I did have a conversation with the Department of Revenue last week about trying to make sure that there's local government participation. And so I'll be working with Scott to make sure that we can identify whether or not we want to put together a letter or some type of correspondence, or have Peoria participate when it's appropriate as this task force kind of moves forward, just to make sure that there's some representation there, because I do think this is going to be critical. Property tax is one of those issues that the General Assembly has been very interested in for a long time. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions before I move to veto session and quickly wrap up.
Any questions? Steve?
Could you go back maybe to PPRT and the potential impact? I know you covered a little bit, but take us down a level to say, what could the potential impacts be at a local level
Sure.
to us? Because that's important to me and Julie back here. So.
Yeah. Well, just some historical context. Back in 2012, I believe, it might have been 2014, but around that time was when the General Assembly really first realized that, oh, wait a second, there's this pot of money. At that time, CPRT was about $1.4 billion, if my memory serves me correct. And that's when we started to see them slowly start ciphering some of those funds away to pay for things the state traditionally has paid for. I think if you fast forward now, last year or last fiscal year, I think CPVRT was at about $4.3 billion. So it was quite a jump. Now, a lot of that jump took place very recently. I think in 2019, PPRT was only 1.3. So a lot of that had to deal with kind of the boom we saw after the pandemic when people were spending, businesses reported, record profits. What we're probably going to see now is that decrease of about $1 billion. So we're going to be looking at 3. So CPPRT is very difficult because it doesn't impact everyone the same. The calculations that IDOR uses, to me, are magic sometimes. I've tried to have them explain it to me multiple times. I still can't get it in. But every county and every taxing district receives just, a different dollar amount. It's not like LGDF where it's equal across the board. Taking $1 billion away on top of the $300 or so million the state now uses to pay for their responsibilities. I mean, that means we're looking at about $1.3 billion less. I don't have a number of what that would look like to Peoria, off the top. But if you just think about it, I mean, you're probably looking at maybe a couple $100,000 less. I would feel comfortable kind of giving that number as a general guideline. Again, not knowing, and I know that number can fluctuate. And we had been seeing, taxing districts say, oh, I've never received this much PPRT. We received 300 additional extra dollars, 2 years ago. So I think we're going to go back the other way. You might receive it as a comparable. I'd take a look at, fiscal year 19, and see kind of where you were. You'll probably be a little bit above fiscal year 19, but I would use that as kind of as a guide. Yeah, as a starting point. Yeah, no problem. Any other?
Julie, you look like your mind is working pretty overtime there. Do you want to make any comments regarding Steve's question?
Thank you very much for that added information. I do know that, as the county, when we put together the budget, we utilize resources that are available, and the Illinois Municipal League will go through and give a pretty good account for what's happening, which reflects a lot of what the showman has been saying. So I believe that next publication where they'll have another review of revenues, I think should come out in July or August. So I think coupling that with what he said will really be worked into our next budget for FY25. But we have been seeing through the first 5 months lower than what I was hoping. Once, I think a few months ago when we had the financial report, I had looked at that time that usually by July we're about 70% of collection. So once we get to the July distribution, I think we'll have a decent perspective of where we'll probably end up for FY24. So I think right now I don't have a solid number, but I think once we get the July revenue, we can have a better report next month.
Yeah, when you get that information, just share it with us so we are aware where we think it's going to end up.
Okay,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then
Oh,
if I could
wait a
just-
minute, Steve?
Sorry, I just want to veto session. Yeah. Yep. So we did receive dates for fall veto session. It will take place November 12th through the 14th and the 19th through the 21st. 6 days is pretty standard. I will say that those veto session days all are after the election. So, kind of be a veto session / lame duck session, because we will have legislators who likely will not serve in 2025. We are also anticipating there being a lame duck session sometime in early January, although we do not have those dates yet. The reason why that is important is because we are anticipating a very heavy veto session this year. A lot of the issues that were discussed this spring but did not move because it's an election year, and folks wanted to wait to see kind of how the sea changed was. So we are anticipating there to be a lot of action, a lot of movement. Some of the things that you know we need to be aware of or keep our eye on is there's a conversation happening around a comprehensive paid or sick leave bill. Um, again, this isn't a comment or stance one way or the other, but just something we need to be aware of because of the fiscal implications. We've already seen, the paid leave bill that was passed. The timing of that wasn't great, and so one of the things that I've been having conversations with legislators is if you're going to do some type of comprehensive paid or sick leave package, there needs to be enough time so local governments can budget for that. To make sure that there's enough staffing in place. Those type of considerations sometimes get missed. So California did a comprehensive package, I think it was 2 years ago. And so they're looking to use that as a potential model. My understanding is that this would be in an addition to the existing leave options that are out there currently, either paid or sick or family medical leave, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just another consideration. How all of those different pieces work together is something I think we need to make sure the General Assembly understands how that can be impactful at the local level when we're trying to hire, recruit, and maintain staff positions. Another issue was a crime-free housing bill that kind of stalled out. There was a proposal to essentially do away with the ability for local governments to have a crime-free housing ordinance on their books. There's going to be some more conversations. I do think between the proponents and some of the concerns that were brought forward by local governments, I do think there is a middle ground that can be found where maybe more prescription being described in law about what ordinances can and cannot contain. There's a couple of issues in the northern part of the state where the ordinances just weren't really well thought out. But that's no reason to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, in my opinion. They can be a useful tool if structured properly. So that's going to be a conversation that continues over the summer into veto session. And then, as I mentioned, the push for green energy is continued. I talked about the CCS or carbon capture sequestration. We are going to see legislation during veto session or potential lame duck session dealing with battery storage, which is kind of the next big frontier, I think, as far as renewable energies is concerned. It's great to have solar and wind farms in place, but when it's not sunny and it's not windy, you need to be able to, to have coverage. And so having battery to capture that energy and then have it be ready to be utilized is going to be very important and key to Illinois' clean energy goals. There's obviously a taxation component to this, which the county should be very kind of concerned with. We want to make sure that these large battery storage facilities are paying their fair share on the property tax, because there will be a lot of need if there's a fire, if there's some type of hazardous situation. There's going to need to be training for first responders again to make sure that they know how to respond if there is a potential fire. Putting out a battery fire is way different than putting out a house or building fire. They burn hotter, they burn faster, they take far longer to go out, and you need to respond in different ways. So making sure that there's the ability to fund and train first responders for that is going to be huge. Also, there's going to be the question of siting. We saw what happened 2 lame duck sessions ago where they stripped the ability for county governments to site where wind and solar farms go, essentially. We want to make sure that doesn't happen with battery storage farms. There's a real potential hazard concern here if we put these next to a conservation area, next to a school, next to a nursing home, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to make sure that there is still county and local control over where these are sited. On top of that, there's also a task force right now that's studying electric vehicle battery storage. I think we've seen two fires in the state with regards to that. This study is gonna allow for IEPA to put rules in place, and for people who store these electric vehicle batteries, they're going to need to have certain, rule or respond to certain rules and regulations. Again, just another safety concern. And so those are kind of some of the things we're going to be seeing in veto session and potentially in Dutch session. Again, it's going to be very heavy. There's going to be a whole bunch of other issues that we'll make sure we keep the county informed of. So I'm done unless there's any questions.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you for
Thank you.
giving us an update. We really appreciate that. Okay, we're moving on to resolutions. Contract award for JDC Family Communication System and transfer of funds from IT fund balance, and this is joint with County Operations Committee. Can I get a motion to put this on the floor? Camille, second. Linda? Okay.
Thank you. This was reviewed and passed by the Operations Committee this afternoon, so some of you have probably heard this for a third time already. This is a proposal from the JDC. Unfortunately, Ryan Breedlove had a conflict and couldn't come today to talk through this, but this is a they call it a family communication system. It's a both video and audio family communication system with the inmates that are there and their family. Today, there are 9 phones throughout the facility, and they are not in private locations. So when a family call comes in, they get so much time per week for a family call. Call is transferred, and then they go pick up a phone in the pod they're in and then have those discussions. This system is tablet-based. So there will be tablets they'll use so they can do both video and audio at the same time. And the monitoring can be done of that to comply with the state and federal laws that require certain monitoring to be done. It will use the existing wireless network we have in the facility. And so we found this when we did the review as we were planning to upgrade them from their traditional phone system to Teams Voice. We've completed that part of the project. They are all upgraded to Teams Voice now, and this is the final piece of that. So, any questions?
Questions? Okay. Paul?
How do I want to say it? How can the kids tear these up? Are they built really heavy tablets that if they get mad and they bang them,
That's a great question. I had the same question when Ryan came to me and we started looking at this.
Okay.
So they're in a case. The maintenance of those is covered as part of this. So when one breaks, we're not going to have to pay to get another one. I'm sure in the environment, there's been issues out there with other stuff. So yeah, that's been discussed and it's all part of the agreement. And they're in a confined area where the charging is done, and then the thing itself is encased in a protective case that's supposed to help with that. So yes, good question. Yes, yeah.
Anything additional? Linda?
I could not hear Member Rosenbaum's question, so I feel like I missed that entire thing.
My question was, are the tablets, I guess the best way to put it is child-proof? Because, some in the, at the JDC, these kids aren't sure, they've got additional problems than your normal child does. And if they get mad and they throw these tablets up against the wall, or that was my question, were they pretty tough that the kids couldn't just tear them up and then we're going to have to be replacing them all the time? Or if they were kind of like a construction tablet that a contractor takes out that, they say that you can drive over with your truck and you won't tear them up, if they're along that lines, instead of, being your little iPad that you hand it to a little kid, and if they have a temper tantrum, throw it down and break it. you're out $1,200-1,500 for a tablet or whatever they are now. But I just want to make sure they were a little heavier duty your bill.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any nays? Okay. Committee action, semi-annual review of executive session minutes. Can I get a motion to put this on the floor, please? Phil, second. Betty?
It's a recommendation of the state's attorney's office that all previously held minutes continue to be held because the need for confidentiality still exists. And we recommend that you destroy the executive session audio recordings that are older than 2 years, except for those that relate to pending litigation.
Any questions? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any nays? Okay, thank you. Any public comment? Miscellaneous? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.